to this day, including one of my lab leaders who gave a reading at my wedding. And I learned about political philosophy, and read Foucault and Heidegger, and all of these really great thinkers. I had my first latte and became addicted to coffee at debate camp, and so it was pretty important in that way. And of course, I learned about speaking and how to form a really strong argument, which were really the reasons I decided to become a debater, is I really wanted to learn how to speak in front of an audience, with confidence, and how to polish an argument until no one could really defeat it, which would come in handy at home with my parents, but also in lots of other contexts as well. So today what I want to talk about is the stuff that I learned that wasn't really obvious to me until much later in life and later in my career. And I think, all the things I'm going to talk about today are things that dozens and dozens of my contemporaries in debate would also say they learned from debate. And among some of the people that I debated, when I was in high school and college, there are now state senators, candidates for office, including governor, lawyers from the White House, ambassadors, civil rights leaders, community leaders and organizers, scientists, doctors. It's kind of amazing as you get older and watch all of these people that you sat in an auditorium with at debate camp with, you see them grow up and to become these amazing professionals. And I could have taken any of the paths that they took and tried to pursue those, but instead I did kind of the one that was obvious for a debater, which was I went to law school, and I didn't really have any clue what I wanted to do when I went to law school or where I wanted to end up. But I'll tell you how I ended up where I am now, which is at a law firm called Jenner & Block. So Jenner & Block, when I was in law school, had this incredible reputation. They hired the top law students from Harvard and Yale and Stanford, and they hired people who were clerks at the Supreme Court. And the person who kind of personified that, where I was in law school at Harvard, was a professor named Heather Gerken, not a debater, but a superstar. She was, top of her class, had clerked for Justice Souter at the Supreme Court, and she was a brand new professor at Harvard Law School. And I didn't actually have her as a professor my first year of law school, which they call your 1L year. But I had heard she was great, and I never really had the guts to go up to her and say hello until the last day of our first year of law school. I was 21, I can tell you this, so we were celebrating in a restaurant, and everyone was kind of relieved that exams were over. We'd finished our first year, and I saw that she was upstairs at the restaurant having dinner with her husband. And so I walked up to her, and I was holding a bottle of champagne and drinking out of it, which, like I said, I was 21. Don't do that. And so I walked up to her and I said, I heard you are fantastic, and I would like to work for you next year. And she said, who are you? And I said, hi, my name is Lindsay Harrison. I'm just finishing my first year at the law school, and I heard that you're fantastic, and I would like to be your teaching assistant next year for civil procedure, which is what she taught to the first year law students. And I said, would you like some champagne? And she said, no thanks. I offered some to her husband, he also declined. And then that was kind of the end of the conversation. I went back to the party with all the law students, and she went back to dinner. Fast forward a few months, first day back on campus in the fall, and I assumed that that was sort of an amusing anecdote for her that had been forgotten. But she was on campus, and she saw me carrying all my books from the bookstore where you go and you buy your books for your classes, and she said, Lindsay Harrison, right? And I said, yes, hello, good to see you again. And she said, so what, are you going to be working for me or what? You offered, right? And I said, yes, I am. Thanks for remembering. What's my first assignment? And so that is my first lesson that I learned from debate. So I'm just going to give you 10 lessons. You can write them down if you want. You don't have to. Number one is debate taught me to be bold. Some might say audacious. So debate, especially debate camp, you have this opportunity to work with lab leaders who are, giants in the field, who have won national champions, who are older than you, more experienced than you, more accomplished than you, and you can ask them anything, and you can challenge them, and you can tell them you think they're wrong about whether something's a good argument. and they respect you, and they listen to you, and that encourages you to keep doing that. And I am pretty sure that if I hadn't been a debater and gone to debate camps, that I would not have gone up to a professor who I really respected and thought was incredibly impressive and who would have no idea who I was and say, I would like to work for you, with her knowing that she had no idea who I was. And so that's the first lesson, is debate taught me to be bold. And so I don't think I realized it at the time, but that was definitely something very, very important I took away from debate. And it turned out that it got me my job at Jenner & Block, because Heather Gerken, who by the way is the new dean of Yale Law School, she's gone on to even greater heights. Elena Kagan was the dean at Harvard Law School before she became a member of the Supreme Court. So that kind of tells you where her trajectory is. So Heather Gerken, before she became a law professor, had worked at a law firm called Jenner & Block in Washington. And because we had this relationship with me being her teaching assistant, she called them up and said, you should hire this person. And so that's how I got my job there. And so after I graduated from law school, I clerked for 2 different federal judges, which is something you do. You kind of apprentice in their chambers and help them do research and help them advise them about how to decide cases. I went and I started my career at Jenner & Block. And after about a year there, I'd done a lot of research and I'd done a lot of helping partners, and it was time for me to try to find a case to argue myself, because you become a lawyer because you really want to get in court and you want to argue, and I was still at that point having debate dreams, so it was kind of time for me to get it out of my system and find a case to argue. And so the way that happens, often you get your first argument as a lawyer, is in a pro bono case where someone has no lawyer, and so they would rather have a lawyer than no lawyer, and so they're willing to have someone kind of do their first argument on their behalf. And so from time to time, we would get these emails at the law firm saying, there's this person, they're in really dire straits, they really need a lawyer, do you have someone who's willing to volunteer? And so we got this email about a guy named Jean-Marc in Ken, and he was an immigrant who came to the US from Cameroon and had been in the US actually for almost a decade, but didn't have a visa, and so was considered to be unlawfully present, and was married to a US citizen, had a US citizen son who was 2 years old, and had been kind of dutifully showing up for his appointments at the immigration offices to let them know he's still here, he hasn't committed any crimes, and he showed up and they arrested him and took him to detention. Now, immigration detention sounds like it wouldn't be so bad, but it's really absolutely indistinguishable from jail or prison. You get put in a prison, often mixed in with the general population of people who are there for committing assaults or for drug crimes or gun crimes. And so he was in detention, and he'd been there for about 4 months without a lawyer. And so they said, you know, do you have someone who might represent him? His case is on appeal. And so I said, sure, I'm happy to do it. And so I went to meet him, and I learned a little bit about his story and his case. So this was his case. He had been a kid in Cameroon, and as a teenager had come to oppose the Paul Biya regime. That was the president of Cameroon, who named himself president for life, and was pretty vicious with anyone who was an adversary or political opponent. It is not a true democracy in any sense. And so Jean-Marc had been opposed to having a president for life, and had been part of a group of political activists in college who were trying to, demonstrate and get him out in order to have a free and fair election. And he'd been arrested and put in jail in Cameroon. And if you think detention or jail in the US is bad, Cameroon is far, far worse. The prisoners there were tortured, they were beaten, they were denied food, they were denied water, they were interrogated and asked to name names about other activists so that the government could go and round them up. And so it was a pretty terrible situation, and he only escaped because his father managed to bribe one of the prison guards. And so he escaped from Cameroon. He went first to the Ivory Coast and then to the US. And when he first got to the US, he paid some money to an immigration lawyer who took the money and then didn't do anything. And in fact, that lawyer was later indicted and pled guilty to committing fraud for taking money from immigrants and doing nothing for their cases. So his case was not off to a great start. And the next lawyer tried, but wasn't able to get him a visa, or really what he wanted was asylum, because in the US we give political asylum to people who flee from countries where they are persecuted because of their political beliefs, in addition to their race or their religion or their gender. And so that next lawyer tried, but wasn't able to really get any traction in immigration court, and part of the problem was that they weren't really able to get the judge to focus on his case as opposed to thousands of others that come through their courts every day. A lot of the immigration courts in this country are quite jaded about the legitimacy of claims, and so for whatever reason it wasn't able to happen. And so, but he wasn't actually deported. There was an order that said that the government could deport him, but they didn't act on it. So he tried to reopen his case, and he filed a motion that said, look, things have changed in Cameroon and gotten much, much worse. They're now going through lists of activists from the 90s. His brother was still there and wrote him a letter saying, your name is on those lists, and if you come back here, you're going to be arrested at the airport, and it's going to be bad news. And so he tried to do that, but again lost. And so when he lost that, that's when they came and at his meeting at the immigration court, arrested him and put him in detention. And so what I was being hired to do was an appeal, which is to say to the Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals, the immigration court was wrong for denying his motion to reopen. There was really good evidence, and he should have been granted asylum. Now, on an appeal, you can't present any new evidence. You're sort of tied in with what was presented below, and your argument is just that the judge in the court below made a mistake, and it should be reversed, and he should get a chance to argue new that he's entitled to asylum. So I set about preparing that brief for the appeal, and that would be my first argument. And he called me and said, Lindsay, I was just taken to the airport and they tried to deport me on an airplane, even though they knew that you were my lawyer and that you were appealing my case. And he was apparently told by someone in detention that if he stayed in the car or refused to move, that they wouldn't physically force him the first time. So it was lucky that someone gave him that advice, because sure enough, they brought him back to the jail and he called me. So I said, all right, well, we need to file a motion. And so what we did is we prepared a motion, which is just a request for the judge to do something. And what we asked for was a stay. And you probably have heard the term stay recently because of all the travel ban discussions. That's a court order that says you're not allowed to enforce that law or that rule. And so in this case, it would have been a stay of his deportation order that says, you can't take him to the airport while he has this appeal pending, let's let the courts decide before you send him back. And so we prepared that, we're waiting and waiting and waiting and wondering why is the court not ruling, and then the court rules and says, you're not eligible for a stay. There's this federal statute that applies and that says no one can get a stay basically at all. That was really surprising, and it was surprising in part because that wasn't the rule that was applied in other parts of the country. So if he had been in California or Arizona instead of in Maryland, he would have been entitled to a stay. And so now we were really desperate because we had to get him some kind of relief, knowing they'd already taken him to the airport once. And the fact that there was a different rule in one part of the country from the part we were in was sort of a signal that maybe this is an issue that has to go up to the Supreme Court, because those are the kinds of cases the Supreme Court really focuses on, are cases where there's disagreement in two parts of the country and only the Supreme Court can say who's right. And so we thought to ourselves, well, how do we get this case to the Supreme Court? Normally what you do is you file a petition, you ask the court to take the case, but normally that's after the lower court's already decided the case, and we hadn't even filed our first brief yet on his actual case saying he was entitled to asylum. And the other problem is that filing something like a cert petition, it takes almost usually a month, sometimes longer. There's hundreds of pages, you have to format it correctly, and we just didn't have the time. And so that leads me to my lesson number 2 from debate, which is debate teaches how to be resourceful. What we did is we borrowed from a little case called Bush versus Gore, which you guys probably don't even know about because you weren't born yet. But basically, the way that the election was decided in 2000 is that the Supreme Court decided the election. The race came down to Florida, whose electoral votes Florida was going to get. And the Florida Supreme Court said the electoral votes essentially should go to Gore. And the Bush campaign petition to the Supreme Court. But again, nothing had been finally resolved. So the way they did it is they applied to the Supreme Court for a stay. Same thing we did in the lower courts. And they said, but if you think that you should hear this out, maybe you should convert our stay application, which it takes just like an hour to write, into a cert petition, treat it like a cert petition, and hear the case on the merits. And so that's what happened in Bush versus Gore. They did that, they heard oral argument, they decided essentially the election, and it all happened in a matter of weeks, although at the time it kind of felt like years. So what we did is exactly that. We applied to the Supreme Court and we said, here, give us a stay of deportation, but if you think that this is important enough, maybe you should treat this stay application like a cert petition and hear the case. And that is exactly what I used to do in debates, and what you guys are doing and learning how to do is, when you're in a debate, sometimes you'll go up against a new argument you haven't heard before, a new case, a new position of any kind. And you got to use what you have in your arsenal and be resourceful and figure out, okay, well, what arguments do we have that we could apply in this situation, even if we've never applied them in that situation before. And especially that's true at the start of the debate season, when most of the arguments are things you haven't heard yet. That's what debate really ingrains in you, is just use what you have and in however way you can. And so same with like generic arguments in debate that you can then apply to any specific kind of a case. That's what debate training is all about, and that's really no different than what we did in his case. And sure enough, about 2 weeks later, after we filed the stay application, the senior partner who was kind of supervising me called me into his office and he said, I have some good news and some bad news. And I said, okay, what do you want first? And I said, just come on with it. And he said, okay, they've granted your stay application and they've turned it into a cert petition. And I said, okay, so that's the good news, right? He said, yes, that's the good news. He said, okay, the bad news is, this was basically Thanksgiving of 2008 when I was hearing this. And he said, your brief is due December 19th. Normally you get a couple months, maybe 3-4 months. The government's opposition is going to be due January 7th. Your reply brief is due January 14th. And the argument is going to be January 21st, which is like an insanely expedited schedule for this. And this normally drags itself out over many, many months, and you have time to think about the arguments and really hone the briefs and do a lot of practice, and we were getting none of that. Also, January 21st was the day after the Obama inauguration, so it was going to be kind of crazy in DC, and but my reaction upon hearing all that was that actually, like, wait, where's the bad news? Because I was kind of excited that when everyone was going to be away and on vacation and celebrating the holidays, we would have total and complete time to focus on this. So I said, no, there's no bad news. This is only good news. One thing I should add is that it wasn't at all obvious at this point that I would be the one to actually argue the case. I had senior partners supervising me, and the Supreme Court is, it's quite a big deal. And in fact, when I heard this, I said to the senior partner, this is amazing. You're going to get an argument in front of the Supreme Court. You're going to do a great job. And he looked at me and he said, wait, why would I argue this? And I said, well, because I've never argued in any court. And he said, no, you'll be fine. You'll do a great job. So that is actually lesson number 3 from debate, which is that debate, even if I didn't realize it at the time, did an amazing job of teaching me how to cultivate advocates for myself, which is what you guys are doing with coaches and judges. Every time you have an argument or you have a debate, and you do a good job, what you're doing is essentially providing confidence in yourself in their minds and really making them want to fight for you. And I don't know if anyone actually ever said that to me, but that's actually what happened. I mean, it happened, when I applied to college and I had letters of recommendation from debate coaches. It happened, same thing in college, when I was applying to law school. It happened when I was trying to get a job at Jenner & Block, and Heather Gerken called for me, and it happened when this senior partner said, you'll do a great job. It's that debate really taught me how to have a close relationship with more senior people I was working with and get them to become advocates for me. And so sure enough, this was going to be my argument, and it was a little crazy. So we set about preparing, and we prepared the briefs, and even before we'd finished the briefs, it was time to start practicing arguments. And what you do when you're preparing for an oral argument in really any court, but especially the Supreme Court, is you do a moot, which is no different than a practice debate would be preparing for a debate. So you have judges that act like the Supreme Court justices, and they have all the arguments and have read everything about the case, and they grill you. Because when you argue in front of the Supreme Court, it's very different from debate in one major way, which is that you don't actually get to give a speech. You can prepare to give a speech, but when you get up after about 30 seconds, you're interrupted with questions from the different justices, and then you spend the whole time, which is about 30 minutes, just answering questions. And what they're really doing is they're making arguments to each other about the case by asking you questions. So they ask you stuff in an attempt to try to influence their colleagues. And your job as an advocate is to try to take those questions and somehow use the questions to get your affirmative points across, which can be very tricky to do. So you have these practices. And the moots at first were rough, I will say. My first moot was my first argument ever. And that way, by the time I was in front of the court, it would be my 6th, because I ended up doing 5 moots. This is where debate really came in handy. So the moots last about an hour and a half, and then you spend the regular argument in front of the court's only 30 minutes, and then you spend about an hour after the moots listening to all the judges tell you everything you did wrong and criticize you. And there's not much better preparation for that than debate. And that's number 4. Lesson from debate is the ability to listen and accept criticism. If you're lucky as a debater, at every tournament, you'll get to experience that, 6 to 8 prelims, hopefully all the A-lims until finals. And what you learn to do over the course of a debate career, although it was hard for me, especially at first and even later, was internalize the criticism and use it to get better. It's hard, to resist the temptation to argue with the judges, but you eventually get there, and then you're able to hear what they say. And it doesn't mean that you don't get to disagree with them, especially on the substance of arguments, but you can hear what they have to say and try to incorporate it into your own life and get better. And that's hard for anyone to do. The data on criticism is actually really interesting. There's a lot of social science research about criticism. I just brought in a few statistics because it's kind of fascinating. So among high school seniors, there was a study, and high school seniors were asked about their leadership skills, and they were asked to self-evaluate their leadership skills. And 70% of high school seniors said that they had above average leadership skills. And 2% of high school seniors said that they had below average leadership skills. In terms of their ability to get along with others, 60% of high school seniors put themselves in the top 10%, and 25% put themselves in the top 1%. But it's not just high school. College professors were asked to rate themselves in terms of the type of work they were doing. 94% of college professors rated themselves as doing above average work. So accepting criticism can be quite hard. There's a reason for that old saying that before you criticize people, you should walk a mile in their shoes, because that way when you criticize them, you're a mile away and you have their shoes. It's hard to accept criticism. And so debate drills it into you. Debate makes it so that you crave it almost, and you want it to get better. In fact, I still have all the ballots from the tournament at the end of debate camp at the University of Iowa my freshman year in high school. And I sometimes just look at them because it's just interesting to kind of see where I was and where I am now. Debate is really good at that, and that was really important for me because it helped me get better. And the other thing that got me to get better was confidence, and that is another thing that came from debate. So that's number 5, which is confidence comes from arguments that you conceive yourself. And that really is debate more than anything else. What you do in debate, you come up with new arguments, and you can borrow arguments that other people have conceived and created, but you're never going to make them as well as the arguments that you come up with and conceive yourself. The first time you kind of come up with your own original case, your own original position, just know you will argue that better than any other case that you have ever argued before. And that is what it was like getting ready for the Supreme Court argument, is I wasn't really that nervous as it approached, because what I was doing was coming up with arguments that were being generated from discussions with others, but that I was really trying to generate myself. And then I knew that when I was in front of the Supreme Court, I would know those arguments better than anyone else in the room, including the justices. But I will say there was one other person in the room that I knew would know them as well as me, maybe even better, and that was the lawyer who was arguing for the government. And that lawyer was a guy named Ed Needler, and while this was going to be my first argument in court, it would be his 106th Supreme Court argument. He was the Deputy Solicitor General. He was acting Solicitor General because it was the day after inauguration, and so no one had been confirmed yet. And so that's debate lesson number 6, which is debate teaches you how to punch above your weight. One of the best things about debate is that you debate people that are not as good as you, and you debate people that are better than you, and that's true throughout your career. There's always going to be somebody that's better that you're going to go up against, and it's going to make you better because you're going to rise to their level. The best performances I ever had in debate tournaments were where I got pulled up out of my bracket to debate in a higher bracket, because I rose to the challenge, and I knew that it was going to be hard, and I knew that the people I was going to be debating against had a better record than me. And so I was more focused in my preparation, and I knew that I would have to perform at peak. And so that is something that at the time kind of stinks. Nobody really wants to get pulled up, especially in the final round of prelims, where it's going to decide if you're going to go on the elims or not. But it actually, in retrospect, was a really good thing. There's a tennis players say that the best practice partners are someone who's about 20% better than they are. And I think it's the same is true in debate, the same is true in law. And so the argument happened the day after inauguration. I felt pretty good about it. It went pretty well. Even Justice Scalia, who was known as kind of the toughest questioner on the court, asked me some very critical question, and I gave my answer, and then he said, that's right, which was pretty awesome. It's going to be hard to top that in my entire career, so I feel a little bit like a child actor, but although I'm hoping to be more like Jodie Foster, like Ron Howard. You guys don't know any of these people. Anyways, the child actors that go on to good success, and not the ones that flame out at a very young age, which happens more often. But anyways, it went well. We hadn't practiced rebuttal, which is something that you get. What happens is you take about 25 minutes for your argument, then the government lawyer speaks, and then you get 5 minutes. That's something that's basically impossible to practice, because in a moot, you don't have an opponent, it's just you. But I was like, no problem, I got this. I was a 2AR, I can give a rebuttal. And so we waited, 3 months later, decision comes out, and we win, and it's a 7-2 decision, and the only 2 justices that I didn't get their vote were the ones that didn't ask me a single question, so I felt pretty good about that. Anyone who I had the opportunity to try to convince them, I managed to convince. And that was pretty awesome, but that didn't actually end the case. So what that did was it said, okay, your client can stay here in the country while the case is pending, and so can all the other immigrants that are appealing their case in the jurisdictions that were applying this rule that said you can't do it. So that was really good, but I still had to actually win his case. And by this point, a bunch of time had passed, and so the evidence that they were rounding up these activists from the 90s was kind of stale. And so, this was only going to be a victory if we could get Jean-Marc to be able to stay in the country with his family. And so we set about figuring out, well, okay, what can we do? How can we argue this now that so much time has passed? And it then occurred to me, well, the case got kind of a lot of publicity at the time. And I thought, you know what, why don't we use the publicity that this Supreme Court case got to our advantage? And so what we did is we said, look, anyone who Googles this guy's name now is going to read all about this Supreme Court case. There's this guy from Cameroon who's fighting the government, and he wants to stay in the US so badly and opposes the BI regime in Cameroon so much that he took his case all the way to the Supreme Court and won. And so the argument we made was that he should be allowed to stay in the country because he would be persecuted if he was deported because he won a Supreme Court case in the US. So we kind of turned our win into an argument that he should be entitled to asylum, which of course would never have happened if we hadn't gotten all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's lesson number 7, which is debate teaches you to constantly innovate and constantly be thinking about how to make new arguments and how to use what you have to your advantage. And so that worked, amazingly enough. Normally you don't get asylum based on, like publicity around your own asylum case. It's a little circular, but it worked, and the government agreed not to appeal, and now a lot of time has passed, and Jean-Marc is now a US citizen, and his son is in middle school in the US, and it's kind of amazing. So my career went on, and eventually I had to start making money because I did work in a law firm, and that's kind of what the goal is, in part at least. And so I started doing work for hotel companies. And the hotel business is like 150% more interesting than you think it is. Like, you guys stay in hotels to go to debate tournaments and to go on vacation. I will tell you like the crazy stories about hotels. And how debate has become an advantage even in those cases as well. So one of the first hotel cases I worked on was in Jamaica. So working on hotel cases also has the advantage of letting you work in Jamaica. It was at the Ritz-Carlton in Jamaica. So not just a hotel in Jamaica, but a nice hotel in Jamaica. Although I will say most of my time was spent in the basement going through files, so not like that great. It's still pretty good. So I'm in the basement, and I'm still just an associate at the law firm. I've been practicing law for 3 years, not that long in the scheme of things. And the general manager of the hotel comes down and says, "You have to come upstairs. There's an emergency." So let me give you the backstory of what led to this emergency. So the way the hotel business works, hotels are managed by one company. So like Ritz-Carlton is the manager of the hotel, but the owner of the hotel is some totally different company, or in this case, like a rich person. And so what happens is the hotel management company gets a percentage of the money that comes into the hotel, and if the hotel ends up being profitable, then the owner gets the profits. But the management company gets money no matter what. So when the economy is not doing so great, and the hotel business is not performing so well, the management company is still making their money because it's off the top. But the owner is not getting a lot of profit. So the owner gets kind of resentful at the management company and says, "Why aren't we making more money?" And the management company says, "Because there's a recession." And the owner says, "But I want money." And that's kind of how it goes. So that happened with this hotel, the Ritz-Carlton in Jamaica, and the owner initiated litigation against the management company, against Ritz-Carlton. And so what I was there doing is digging through the files to basically go through the financials and show that Ritz-Carlton was doing a good job and it wasn't their fault that there was a global economic downturn. So the way that their relationship works, the owner and the management company have a contract. And the contract in the hotel business lasts for a very long time, because it's kind of weird for guests to come up 1 year to stay at a hotel and it's a Ritz-Carlton, and the next year it's a Four Seasons. So you have these very long contracts so that there's some kind of stability in the marketplace and people know which hotels are which and whatnot. So this hotel had like another 30 years on the contract. So I'm in the basement going through files. The general manager comes down and says, "It's an emergency." I said, "Okay, let me come upstairs." I'm the only lawyer at the hotel. So again, I'm, third-year associate sent there to go through files, not really there to handle emergencies. I come upstairs, and there are 20 guys in the office, and they're like wearing suits, and the general manager says, "They say they're here to take over the hotel." I say, "That's weird. We have a contract," and so I said, "No, you may not take over the hotel. This is a Ritz-Carlton." And they said, well, they sort of weren't expecting that to be the answer. And they said, "Well, let's go meet in a conference room." And in the conference room, I discovered that they had sent, one of the people that had come to talk to my client, the general manager, was a lawyer. And they knew that Ritz-Carlton had a law firm representing them. And one thing a lawyer is not allowed to do is go and talk to someone else's client if that client has a lawyer. That's a huge no-no, violates all the rules of professional responsibility. You can be sanctioned, you can lose your license for doing it. And they sent a lawyer to tell him to get out of the hotel. And here's the best part. They had no clue that I was going to be in the basement digging through files. Like, it was just random that I happened to be there. So when they came in and said, you need to get out, we're taking over the hotel, he said, I want to talk to my lawyer. And the lawyer said, if you can find one. And so he came down to the basement and got me up. And I said, hello, I am a lawyer. And that was pretty awesome. Because they did not know what to do, and when we went back into the conference room, I said, you know, it is like a violation of your professional obligations to come and talk to my client knowing they're represented. And they didn't really know how to respond to that, because they'd been there prepared to talk about the hotel and the performance of the hotel, and they were trying to sort of do a surprise sneak attack by coming in without any notice, and we took their surprise sneak attack and we raised them one additional surprise sneak attack with rules of professional responsibility and ethics. And they left. And it turned out that, you know, they didn't try it again, and we ended up winning the case, and they ended up paying a bunch of money to Ritz-Carlton, which was pretty great. So that's debate lesson number 8, which is that it teaches you how to confront unpredictable tactics. And that's become true more since I've left debate than it was even when I was part of debate, because there's just been a ton of innovation in argument strategy, in how to argue, in what constitutes kind of fair ground for argument. And I think that's only a good thing, because it will help you to kind of think on your feet, and even when it's not new in a debate, it will teach you how to come up with counter strategies that are just as unpredictable and that can end up, you know, winning, whether in court or in debate. So that was the Jamaica case. Fast forward a year or two, and I have a new hotel case. This one's in Waikiki in Hawaii. Like I said, it's like a nice perk of hotel cases. And so the lawyers for the owners are now getting a little bit smarter. So this time, we were in Hawaii, we were doing interviews, and we got on a plane to fly back to the US by way of Chicago, and it turned out that the owners had a spy on the inside who was a lot less cool than Hercules Mulligan. It was the security guy for the hotel who had worked, in this case Marriott was the client, and he worked for Marriott, he was a Marriott employee, but the owners kind of basically paid him off and promised him a job, and he waited until we left and then called the owners and said, okay, the lawyers are gone. And this time, the owners came in with 80 employees and armed guards, and in the middle of the night, it was about 3 a.m., took over the lobby of the hotel, and literally kicked out all the Marriott employees and said, it's our hotel, we forget about the contract. And while that sounds like insane, it has actually worked before. Because what the courts end up saying is, look, we're not going to get involved in this crazy dispute. What you should do is, Marriott, if you think you were ousted from the hotel, you should sue for damages, and the owner will have to pay you a bunch of money. But there's some problems with that, including that the owner will just say, like, no, or will refuse to pay, or it could take a long time, and in the meantime, you're out of this property where you're supposed to be managing it. It's also just really damaging for your hotel brand. And so what happened is I landed in Chicago, saw, you know, my phone had blown up, and we got immediately on the phone, and I said, okay, I will get back on the plane. And I got back on the plane, I flew back to Hawaii, and it began like the 3 craziest weeks of my life. So basically, we were nonstop for 3 weeks working as a team. So I was in Hawaii working to put together affidavits and evidence of what had happened and why it was wrong. And then my colleagues were in New York and DC and Chicago, and they were putting together briefs to send to court. And the goal was to get a judge to say that this should be reversed and that they should have to let Marriott back in. And for 3 weeks, we all kind of did our part. And 3 weeks later, we got a court order, and it was the first of its kind, saying that the owner had to get back out and let Marriott back in, which was amazing. And the thing about this experience that was so amazing is that I was not even in court for any of it, and yet it was like one of the greatest victories of my career, because I was on the ground doing the work and the research that set up the victory in court. And that, again, this is debate lesson number 9, which is about teamwork. You know, the thing about debate that I did not appreciate at the time I found it really frustrating, is that as a freshman, and then as a sophomore, and then as a junior, you're not really getting to necessarily go to the best tournaments, the round robins. You're not, you're kind of doing work, and it's supporting the top people on your team. And it's great for them, but like at the time I was kind of frustrated and wanted to be the one going out to all the top tournaments. And then later I kind of, in college really, learned to appreciate how awesome it was when you contributed to a victory that someone on your team achieved and brought back to your school. And that was certainly what happened in this particular case in Waikiki, is that like that victory was as much mine as the senior partner who got up in court and got to be there when the order was handed down. And actually one of the best parts of the whole experience was that we had gathered all the Marriott employees that had been kicked out of the hotel in a ballroom a couple streets away at a different Marriott hotel. And I got to be the one to announce to them that we were going to be back in, and it was like amazing. People were crying and hugging each other, and getting to be back on the ground was actually probably a more thrilling experience than being the one in court. And so I thank debate for that, even though I didn't really appreciate it at the time. So I continued to do hotel cases, and I continued to do other cases, some death penalty cases, and I do some immigration work, and then comes November and the election. And I decided I need to be doing a lot more. And so I'll tell you guys a little bit about some of the projects I'm doing now. And so here's a few. So one of them is the travel ban litigation, which is about the ban on letting in, on entry of immigrants from 6 countries. One of the things I'm doing is I'm advising a group of like 32 colleges and universities about how to deal with it and how to get all of their students and faculty and researchers into the country in light of that ban. And we also, on behalf of those colleges and universities, have been submitting briefs to the courts saying how damaging the travel ban will be for universities and for campuses and for just academic progress and research progress. So that's one thing. Another thing is we created an immigration project at a detention center. So there are detention centers all over the country, and one thing you might not know is that while a criminal defendant has a right to counsel, and there's a whole public defender system set up so that they can have a lawyer appointed for them if they can't afford one, there's not any similar system for immigrants, even though those immigrants are put in the very same prisons and jails that criminal defendants are put in. And so what we've done is created a system, a pilot program at a detention center in Calhoun where there's about 250 immigrant detainees, and almost none of them have lawyers. And what we've been doing is we go there every few weeks and we talk to the immigrants that are there, and then we get them lawyers. And so we're basically functioning as like a public defender kind of referral system for immigrant detainees there. And getting them lawyers is an amazing thing because the statistics show that it makes a huge, huge difference in their outcomes. If you don't have a lawyer, 95% chance you're getting deported. If you have a lawyer, those odds go up immeasurably, and it kind of differs depending on what kind of case you have, but no matter which kind of case you have, it's a huge, huge increase in your chances of success if you have a lawyer. And so that's another project. Another project is about the assault on science. And so I don't know how much you guys know about the Trump administration's kind of feelings about climate change and science in general, but they're not huge fans of science. And so what's happening is there's all these federal scientists who work in all different agencies at the EPA, at NOAA, at the FDA, and their work is really threatened right now by political appointees that are now filling the political slots at the agencies. And so what we've done is working with an organization called Union of Concerned Scientists, created basically a hotline where they can call, and everything is confidential. They're calling a lawyer, the conversations are privileged, and they can get legal advice about how to fight back against the politicization of their scientific work. And some of the things we can do are, bring a lawsuit, but we have kind of sneakier ways to fight back, including if there's information that they want to get out, what we can do is, instead of exposing them and putting them at risk of being fired, we can submit a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, and say, do you have any documents on X subject? And under federal law, the government has to release them. And so it's kind of, we have other ways of getting information out that doesn't put the jobs and the security of these folks at risk. So that's another project. And that's my last lesson, which is number 10, which is about multitasking. So there's a lot of talk, like in the grown-up universe, about work-life balance, kind of balancing your family obligations with work and how hard that is. But I had debate school balance, which was much harder than anything that I have now, because we were like working in the debate office so late at night, and had homework in 8 different classes, and we're traveling to tournaments, and missing school, and you figure out how to juggle that, and you get to work in the workplace, and it actually seems kind of easy. And so the ability to have all these different projects, and also like see my kids and my wife, is really only made possible because debate really helped me understand how to do that early on, and kind of forced me to develop those kinds of skills. So I am pretty grateful for that. So one last word about teamwork, which is that I love my job, and it's partly because I get to work on really important cases that affect really important issues and affect a lot of different people. It also pays well, I like it for that reason, but really most importantly, it allows me to get to go to work every day with some of the smartest, kindest, most committed people that I've ever encountered in my life. And that's what debate was and what it can and should be for you guys. And I'm not sure I appreciated it at the time, but I certainly do now. And I hope that you will see some of what it took me 20 years to appreciate about debate as you go through the summer and get to debate for however long you have left in school. And I really thank you guys for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? I would think there would be a few, given some of the subjects that were covered. I'll even turn off the camera now.